Welcome one and all. Brian Conlon is my name, and it's my joy to be here to welcome Aidan Conlon to home, to Geevagh, and to this event that's part of heritage. And so how lovely it is. You know, Aidan's wife Siobhan has just said to me that our oldest grandchild, their oldest grandchild, Cara Bradley Conlon is here. So you have to be the youngest member of our gathering. So welcome, Cara. And of course, I'm at the age now where I'm beginning to not hear things as well as I'd like. And so I thought, Siobhan had said Tara, and I said, well, 2 over from Cara is Tara, another Tara. So it's a Cara Conlon and a Cara Conlon Bradley sitting just beside one another. And there's the excitement of the interconnections of one another. This event is a few years in gestation, and I was encouraging Aidan to have some event like this for some time, and we came upon this idea that a lovely event in terms of celebrating our heritage. And so I'm aware that people travel distances to be here, and so I hope you'll derive great joy and satisfaction from being together with our neighbours, and in some way, maybe even rekindling some friendships. That'll be a lovely outcome of the day. And we're all on the giants of I suppose we're on the shoulders of giants, those who've gone before us, in their own individual way. And so a lovely small little piece. I was at a lecture yesterday at the CNME, the Centre for Nursing and Midwifery Education, and this lady before me, she gave a little talk, and just how one person can make a difference in their lives. And she used a little snippet of Ian Wright. Now, some of you know who Ian Wright is. I haven't a clue. But anyway, he was the captain of the English rugby team, was it? Arsenal. All right. That's how much I know about his name. But anyway, there was a teacher that had been very good to him as he went through a troubled childhood. And this teacher was brought along to meet him in the stadium. And there is Ian Wright sitting in a seat in an empty stadium, and then he looks behind him, he sees his old teacher, and he takes off his cap, this famous captain, quite accomplished man, and he takes his cap off, and he looks at him and he says, "Oh, sir, I thought you were dead." And he started to cry. And he said, it's the most beautiful little clip, as he says, "You were so good to me, and nobody else was." And so I think, when we think of the giants ahead of us, there were people who were good to us. We were all raised by a village. That's the one thing that makes our generation. And we give thanks to them. There was villages of people that raised us. Aidan Conlon, welcome home.
Thanks very much, Brian. I'm definitely among friends, neighbours, family, and that village that is more than the village, it's the parish of Geevagh. As Brian said, I've always had an interest in Geevagh and its history and what it's all about. Over the years, I've been picking up bits and pieces of the history of Geevagh and Sligo, for that matter. But COVID gave me the opportunity, for what it's worth, to gather what I had and to put some kind of sense on it. So I did the book, covered it, put it together, got it printed in 2021, so that we'd have something, for not forever, but at least in paper, put down on paper, so that anyone that wants to see some of the records that we have of Geevagh, going right back. Like there are records that more recent records, which again, hopefully, might be put down on paper. But today's event is both pulling from what I've done in that group, and also coming up to more recent times and dealing with Geevagh's heritage, which includes a lot of things. It's not just the heritage is basically a legacy of our past, and whatever it is, it could be quite a distant past, or it could be a very recent past. There's the physical things, the landscape, which we're actually in the middle of here in the sports field, as it were, roads, buildings, and so on. And there's the intangibles, the kind of things, the history, our traditions, our customs, the kind of things that we do, not necessarily different to other parishes or other localities. Our stories and our beliefs. I deal with some of them, not everything, because there's only a limited amount of time. And this is to be passed on to generations. I suppose in the past there was a much greater kind of oral tradition where people kind of met and talked and chatted and that. Now maybe it's not so easy to keep local heritage and local traditions and local customs passed on. Okay, so I'm from Geevagh, and this is one of on the Conlon side, my grandparents, Pat and May Conlon, and their family in 1938. My grandmother was Flynn from Tap. The photograph there at the back is Maureen, Reach, and then May and Grandad, Pat. And in the front then you have Sean, who went to Australia way back in 1950. And then you have Daddy, Ori Conlon. Holden is Camry Shy brother, Kevin. Abroad. And then my Aunt Tess. Now the only one that's missing there is my Aunt Patona, who's still hale and hearty and living in America, in Florida. So she's missing. She wasn't born before 1938. And that Conlon connection gives me Flynn connection, connections with the Cullens in Five Oaks, the Conlons obviously in Flagfield. So it gives me, it broadens out my kind of connections there. And then there's the McTiernan connections in Umber or as the Tiernans would have called it, Murrow. But it's Umber, as my grandfather, Pat again, or Pat or Paddy, I'm not quite sure which was which, and Mary. And Mary Kane, she was from Tree McMurta, which is in Kish, between Castlebaldwin and Ballymote. So he went a distance to get his woman. They had a big family, 4 boys and 6 girls. The girls, Maureen, Nancy, Bridget, Margaret, Mammy was Kathleen, and Aidan. And the boys, as Mammy used to call them, the boys, the men, where Tommy was the eldest, was Mickey, Paddy was next, Mickey, and James. So the connections there, and then that broadens out in Geevagh to Brehony's, who are no longer in Five Oaks. Brehony's actually as well up in Brakeen in Ballyrush. So that was, so we have, I can honestly say that I'm connected, and apart from knowing people, it's been there for quite a while. Just getting back to the book, the history. Incidentally, I've no doubt that some of you have bought the book because it's been out for about 4 years. It's also for sale in Lieber in Sligo, but anybody that hasn't it, I have little USB sticks, which anyone that doesn't have a book can take it away and share it, obviously. So the history of that, I decided I could have written further into the 1800s, but there's so much information in the 1800s, in the 1900s, in our own century, not our own century now, it's the last century, that it would have taken a lot thicker book to do. So in this book, I basically started from the appendices, from what I had actually, the research, because that was the most important part. That was the information that I had gathered, and it was the most interesting part, to be honest, was finding things and saying, oh my goodness, that's. So Geevagh is referred to in the annals. I go through some of them, but obviously I won't, in a wee while, I won't deal with them all. But they all have, some of them are specific about Geevagh, others give an idea how life was like, for example, for example, there's a book there on Captain Quiller's adventures in Conlon. This is at the time of the Spanish Armada. This was a boy that got shipwrecked at Strida and had a hell of a time in Leitrim until he escaped to adventures in Coleraine and on to Scotland. But he left a great description of how people lived at that time, which was probably similar to how people lived in Geevagh or elsewhere at the time. So, and then I basically I felt it necessary to kind of have a story for the book, which includes all the different aspects that you might find in terms of the landscape, farming, or buildings, ownership of land, which is contentious at any time, but it's also interesting. So I'm going to use this, but I'm not going to dwell on it, on the book. Okay, so we're here in Geevagh, and Geevagh definitely, in terms of the landscape and the resources, is very varied and very interesting and very challenging at times. We have a mountain on one side, a lovely lake on the other side, then with valleys, drumlins, and so on. We have a lovely lake, Loch Arrow. It's not the only lake in the parish. We're surrounded by Loch Skane, Loch Bow, and actually there are some lakes that I didn't even know existed. Loch Ah, Black Loch, the White Loch up in Highwood, and they're. The last few summers I spent a while cycling around the parish, and I found places I never knew existed when I was growing up. Very interesting. So we have all that. We have the Fjordish River, which is right here beside us, with a lovely bridge that was built probably around the 1800s, a stone-built bridge. And interesting enough, the parish of Geevagh, the waters that flow through the Fjordish and onto the Shannon end up down near Limerick before it hits the Atlantic, whereas the Highwood end of things goes into Loch Arrow, on out to the Unshin and Calooney and Ballysadare, and goes into the Atlantic from that angle. But the Fjordish itself and others was harnessed, and it still was harnessed up to recently in terms of energy and milling. So the milling, there was a mill at Five Oaks. There would have been a mill also in Ummerow, probably around Curry, where Curry and Ummerow connect. And there was also a mill in Ballandoon linked with the monastery there. But they were all important parts, probably more important historically than recently. Now Geevagh itself, and we know this, the bedrock is limestone. Unfortunately, it's not all limestone. But limestone is it's good for grazing. It's very free, permeable rock, and it was set down, believe it or not, when Ireland, or at least this part of the world, was in a tropical zone, in a very shallow sea that allowed the build up. As you can see, the layers of limestone that was laid down on top of each other from crustacean or from little sea creatures that died off over millions of years. So I come back to pasture and all of that. Now, part of the values of limestone were the quarries which you have all over the parish at different places. Carndarney, Flagfield, which is an interesting one, Ummerrow, and lime kilns. And lime was very important in terms of, for a lot of things. Well, it's a good fertilizer, it's good for whitewashing, it's good for building, lime mortar. And there's a lime kiln, or the remains of a lime kiln up at the back of, it's just down from Curran's old house up in Carndarney. So the limestone itself, and we had plenty of limestone obviously, with coal, although you can substitute turf for the coal. And the sandstone that we have an abundance of as well, funny enough, was very good for lining your lime kiln. Now we have drumlins. We're not short of the drumlins, which, courtesy of the Iron Ice Ages, has left us, drumlins, drum sauna. There's quite a few townlands. Finds also. You can see them physically. They're not as easy to work, to plough, to do anything with, because they vary in what they're composed of. Now, Geevagh mountain, which is just at the back of us here, is an interesting case because it's composed of layers of, the bog is at the top, which is very recent, like about 10,000 years old, or 7 to 10,000 years old, and then there's some slate or shale, really. But then you have coal, sandstone, so you have a few seams of coal, and it was laid down when there was this was part of a delta region with mountains to the north, very, very large mountains that poured down into a delta. The details, I'm going to let you do some research on yourselves, but what it has left us with is coal. And we have exploited coal in and this is a picture in 1933. A priest called Father Brown did a lot of picture taking, but this is an interesting one. You can see Loch Allen in the background, Sleeping here probably as well. You can see the horse carts all getting filled up. The horse itself one of them has a nose bag, taking a rest. And there's quite an amount of coal there as well. That coal would have been brought to the towns, to the local towns, to boil, been brought into Sligo. Any of the institutions, would have used coal. And what we have here in Geevagh, we have two distinct coal mine areas. One of them is where my uncles, the McTiernans, but before them, the Conlons, that would be Brian's ancestors, David's, and so on. They ran the coal mine, or leased it from the Kyo's before the war, probably, and during the war. And they again would have provided coal to, particularly during the restrictions of the war, they would have just supplied it to the institutions, to the, and it was always restricted during the war. Then after the war, the McTiernans, my uncles, three uncles to start with, Paddy, Mickey and James, took the lease and worked the mines. I think James opted out for a wee while, or in a short while. But they ran the mine through the 50s, 60s and the 70s, definitely. So that was an important employment opportunity, left its kind of legacy in terms of, helping people out, but also it was a difficult and dirty job. And there was also Lynn's coal mine. The McTiernan's coal mine, we're in the townland of Ballashee at the moment. The coal mine was right up the mountain in this townland, Ballinasheed. Lynn's coal mine was just further on in Glen Kalami. Lynn's, of course, were at a hardware shop in Ballyfarnan, and they also lived in Anna Lodge. This is the lease that they got in 1928 from the previous landlord, Hewitson. The interesting thing is, even though the landlords had kind of lost ownership of the actual land, they retained the mining rights for how long, I'm not quite sure. Okay, so Geevagh, people have been living here in Geevagh for a long time, and we know that because of the tombs that are left, the megalithic tombs that are left, particularly in the Highwood part of the parish. But also, there's also a megalithic tomb in Coolmurda, but this one is up in Highwood. And it will be tied in with the same kind of thing over in Carrickeel and over further towards Ballymote on the higher ground. In Carrickeel, for example, anyone that's been up there, it is quite interesting. This here will be covered by stones. The likelihood is that this was covered by stones as well, and people just used it for building walls or building houses or whatever. But the bigger stones, thankfully, weren't that easy to move, so they left their mark. So we have a prehistoric story that goes back. It was obviously a very well-organized society as well. Now, we'll come on to, we'll get to our own time yet. But in early recorded history, we have the annals, and these are specifically, mention and cover Geevagh in some in very great detail, others in not so much detail. So the annals, which were basically written initially by the monks and priests in the monasteries, there's a very useful record of what Holy Trinity Abbey, this is an abbey that was in Lonkey, what it owned, what it controlled, both in Geevagh and elsewhere. The Stratford Survey of Connaught, which was done in 400 years ago, it gave a very good detail of all the town lands and what the rent was, what actually people, I'll come on to that in a moment. And the other one is the census of Elfen, which was carried out by the Protestant Bishop Singh in 1749. And it again gives a great detail of all the names, the families, and the numbers. Okay, the annals. And this is interesting. Like 1236, there's mention of a priest in Kilmactrana, which is Kilmactrani, obviously. And he died at that stage. That's the Annals of the Four Masters. In 1507, Ballindoon Abbey was commenced, it was started to be built in 1507 by Thomas O'Farrell. They were Dominicans that started this particular abbey. It's a reflection of the wealth and power of the MacDonaghs at that time, in the early 16th century, that they would undertake such a big project. And it's a phenomenal level. I think it's a really lovely building even yet. And the next one is the O'Dagnans of Kilronan. Now I know that but they also had a link with Kilronan, had a link with Shanboo and the other areas. And this is one of the what they would call olives, the historian, scribe. There would have been. It was a family thing. This is hereditary. You passed it down from one, usually man, to his son. Others in that vein were the Carneens, the O'Carneens, the Lunnies. The Lunnies aren't particularly Geevagh name. Okay, so the links that we have to, these are historical links now at this stage, but they also had a bearing on how land kind of transferred at the time of the suppression of the monasteries. So you have two islands that are relevant here. One is Trinity Island, and the other one is Church Island. The White Canons were on Trinity, and they had, this was a way of supporting the religious groups or the religious monasteries at the time. They would have been supported or funded by, in the case of around Boyle, the McDermotts, in the case of here, the McDonoughs. And they had rights and access to a lot of the land, but they also had rights to the churches and so on, and the fees that might have come with it. So for example, Killarney, which is quite a big townland, when I say townland, it's a big area. That and would have a mixture of good land, wooding, wood, and so on. For example, the monastery or the canons would have been in control of the mill at Five Oaks. That would have been their kind of right, and probably it would have suited the locals as well to have someone of that kind of standing. They also had Shanhu, that was half quarter, Killadoon, Umber they had for a wee while, but the McDonough man that gave it to Trinity, Holy Trinity, he decided, I don't know why, he didn't continue leaving it with them, so it reverted to the McDonoughs. Kilmactranny, all of those townlands, and Kilmacroy, which is incidentally is the only townland in Geevagh parish, which is in County Roscommon, as you know. The next one is Inchmacnearn Abbey, and they were Augustinians. Kilkeer, again, includes also the other townlands of Clough-Mean, Dromore and Highwood, which is quite a good spread of land. So that link was there for right through into the 16th century. But with the suppression of the monasteries, most of that land, that particular land, was passed on to English colonizers, or just people who were in favour with the king or queen of the time. So that had a bearing, and it lasted down for centuries. The other abbey that I've just spoken about, the Dominican Abbey in Ballandun, as you probably, when speaking to the convert, most of you know it and probably have relations buried there or whatever. It's a fantastic building itself, and hopefully it can be maintained. Now the Stratford Survey, we're moving on into the 1635, which is just before the 1641 rebellion, which did cause a lot of problems and a big change again in the later parts of the 1600s. It was done to raise taxes for the king and also to prepare for colonization. They wanted to know what each townland and what it amounted to. Now even though, and I know it was done for that kind of reason, it's a very valuable source of information right now. They had a map to go with it as well, which is some of the places you'll recognise, and some of the townlands are not particularly, like for example, but they're very good. Now, obviously seen that bog was very valuable, which it was. It was a very valuable source. They figured that the mountains were unprofitable, so that kind of gives it away. They were in for profit. They weren't in for scenery. Even might have scenery, but there's not much use if it didn't have profit. So you have Darnay, which is Carmen Darnay, with Cabra, Ballincullen, the Hummer Road there, but some of them not that cheap. That would probably be Mounttown now at this stage. And you have some of them that are quite recognisable Wintra, Kilmac Tran. This is the kind of script that they had for writing it. It was old, but it was still English. It was still, the top line you can figure out is Ballincullen or Ballincullen 1/4, the inheritance of Tirloch MacDonagh, who had so on and so forth. And then the bottom two lines is good arable land and good pasture. That I wouldn't have figured that without a lot. And have good shelter. And then the bottom line, it would raise 40 cows and is worth £10 per annum. So that's the kind of script. Just to give you an idea, a few of the townlands and what the kind of rent. And the rent is kind of interesting because it's a mixture of money, which probably wouldn't have been that easy to get either. But it's also a mixture of goods. A medal is actually a measure. And if it's like, if you think about the Liam McCarthy Cup, it's that kind of four-handled measure. So you had butter, 40 workmen. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but it's either 40 men for 1 day or 1 man for 40 days, I'm not quite sure. So Number Road had a good English mill with a tuck. And the tuck is something to do, which is important in terms of clothing, because most of the clothing was woolen, so the wool had to be woven, but raw woven wool is very rough and not very waterproof, so the tuck is just pounding the water, or pounding the woolen garment. And you can do it pounding with your feet, but obviously if you have a mill that pounds it, it's a lot more efficient, and it leaves the garment more comfortable, more it doesn't let water in and so on. And at a very good quarry, 6 days mowing, so obviously meadows and hay was a thing of the time, and we talked about it grazing 70 cows. Now this is Flagfield. And Flagfield has got a lot of names. It's Macaralaka, but here it's got Tullin MacTunan, and that is probably Tully, as in hill, Mac, son, Tiernan, probably the hill of the son of the Tiernan. And the Tiernan at that stage would probably be the MacDonagh who was based in the Conlon area, or the Geevagh area really. So the owner is Tirloch MacDonagh, who owned quite a bit of the Geevagh part at that time. He was based in Geevagh. He wanted 10 measures of butter, 40 measures of meal, an interesting 8 barrels. I'd say the barrels were probably small, but still he was looking for beer or malt, either straight up beer or malt, which is kind of an earlier stage in producing beer. 4 fat muttons, 20 workmen, and a beef. Now beef, or that big animals, weren't generally cooked or killed for the simple reason that there wasn't for refrigeration or that. But a beef would be very useful for a big party or a big event. So that might have been where that came in. So Flagfield, good arable land, good shelter, and turf. Turf was an important part. Now the turf I was thinking about this in Flagfield, and the only turf I can think of, because all the townlands, were quite, they weren't set in stone. They didn't become set in stone until the Ordnance Survey in the late 1830s. So it's very likely that the bog they're talking about is probably up at Dromore West, Drobeg West, which there is a bog up there. And raised 50 cows and 3 days mowing. So they were all, and Barrow, I couldn't go through them all, they're in the book or in the USB. And this one in Barrow is interesting in that we're talking about a lady who has O'Rourke's daughter. She was obviously married to MacDonagh. The O'Rourkes were big people in Leitrim, lords and so on, obviously at this stage. had been seriously kind of diminished in power and authority and wealth. But she had it for a dowry, so basically she held Barrow, which is Bor Rua, is the Bor is the top, the red top. It's out beside that Barrow. And although it's possessed by her, it's inherited by her son John. I'm assuming it's her son as well, it's Conlon's son. And the rent again is butter, fat mutton, beer, and workmen. So you have good, it's again features good arable land, good sheep, rocky ground, which we can understand, good limestone, and a castle upon it. At that time there was a castle. It was basically maybe 100 more yards over past the abbey, right beside the lake. The foundations or the mark of it is still there. It had good turf. I'm not sure where the turf is there. It doesn't have meadow, and again it graze 50 cows. So that goes through all the different townlands, and in terms of what we understand now, it's not far off the mark in terms of the description. That's a medder. It's a wooden vessel which was used mainly for drinking, but also for measuring. It doesn't measure. Obviously it could be big, small, or different. So the medder was there to measure. The next aspect or the next bit of information we get again is this census. And again, it was handwritten. It's pretty legible. You know, you can see it. I apologise for sticking maybe with townlands I'm familiar with. But there's a Conlon there, there's a Brennan. You can see with the children, in the case of Pat Conlon, he has 2 children under 2, under 12, no, under 14. It's not that easy for me to read it here. So it gives you the idea of the children, and then if there are any servants. So the next name, Brennan, has got both a manservant and a women's servant. The Brennans were always like to have their servants. So we have some more Conlons there. And sadly, there's a couple of names there, Catherine McDrury, and she's a widow. Although there seems to be a reasonably wealthy widow. She has children over 14 and one servant. And Catherine Finan is a widow, but unfortunately the poor lady is a beggar. So that's a sad one. There's, again, the book has details on all the townland, or the people in all the townlands with their names and this kind of detail. Just to give us an idea of what occupations or what we did, or what they did. There was a lot of labourers, there was obviously farmers, shepherds. There was quite a few weavers. So the parish was quite self-sufficient. Blacksmiths in Renfrew and Clackmeen. The coopers to make the barrels in Striduff and Killarney. The miller in Umber, that probably links in with the mill, obviously, on the Fjordish. I'm surprised there's only one tailor, probably more, a brogue maker in Striduff and in Father Lake. And there was only one schoolmaster and one priest. But it is interesting that there was a priest and that it was recorded, because this was the time of the penal laws, when basically priests were not allowed to practice, and even find their lives quite difficult. So this is what was happening. It was quite a rural, self-contained parish. Our nearest town, Boyle, which was probably a very important town right down through the years, it had a lot of, for example, which is interesting, it had a lot of shoemakers. It had made up for in terms of tailors. It had quite a few tailors, weavers, so coopers again, carpenters, plenty of blacksmiths. So there was a lot of activity. It was a kind of it probably was a subsistence in the society, but Boyle probably did a lot of the kind of activities that were important. Some of them are quite interesting. A saltman, a writing master, whatever that is, I'm not quite sure. And so this was 1749, this was in the 18th century. All of that kind of disappeared then when the English kind of industrialization occurred and the production of garments that eventually were brought in, sold, and probably outcompeted the locally produced. But that was how we were, and that's how it happened. Now, I'm going to leave that kind of heavy historical part just for the moment. Basically, Geevagh, apart from the mining experience that we have here locally, it's a farming community. We've had livestock at different times. We've obviously had the dairy cattle. It's not so long ago that the countryside was full of short-horn cows and black Aberdeen Angus offspring. Every farm had a quarter of an acre, more or less, of spuds, potatoes, with a follow-on of oats. And there was also sheep, not so much that I remember around locally where I lived, but there were sheep. And certainly historically sheep were important to produce the wool and the muttons that the chieftain was looking for. Every house had chickens, hens, chickens, produced eggs for the house. And there was also the egg money. I know my grandmother, who we saw later or earlier on, she would have sold her eggs, well, not really sell them, she would have brought them to what used to be Bushell's shop. It was actually her brother-in-law's shop, Aidan Conlon, at one time. And keep an account. And with the eggs, she was able to get the flour, tea, and sugar. And at the end of the year, probably get money back. So it was an important part of the economy, particularly the house economy of a lot of our ancestors. And of course, pigs. Pigs were a very, very important part of the kind of community. Helped to pay the bills. They were a way of maintaining, they were very good at, they were a quick turnaround compared to trying to breed and sell, feed and sell cattle, or indeed sheep for that matter, but sheep a bit quicker. So it is a farming community. And it's not that long. I do remember, and I'm sure quite a few here remember, plough being used. Not so much the loy, although the loy was a very important implement, particularly on heavy ground or stony ground, where it wasn't that easy to bring horses. And before the cast iron plough was available, it was actually a wooden plough. The local blacksmith making whatever was necessary in terms of the sock or the kind of the parts of the plough that would wear out. So we've had that. And of course the bar, which was an annual event that all of us, well, not all of us obviously, never remember the bar, but many of us remember toiling on. God help her, one of my cousins spent her summer holiday bringing turf from the bog. I think it was 1965. But the weather was good like this year, so we got through it. And the meadow was also a kind of a place that was either fun or hardship. And this year it would have been okay. If it was wet, it was hard to. And when I say Mehel, there were occasions, you know, and thankfully you'd have neighbours coming when the rain would be coming and maybe the hay would be ready to put up, as they call it. You'd have neighbours coming to help you out to get and vice versa. So that there was that kind of cooperation that was normal and natural. The rain was coming and the hay was ready. It would be put up, as they say. Harvest time. Generally speaking, it was usually a side that cut the oats at home and used. In a lot of cases, but if you had a good stretch of oat ground, you could cut it with horses and get it lifted into sheaves, and then you get the stooks in the background, well built and ready to dry out. And digging the spuds. It's about this time of the year, particularly when you go back to school, and I'm sure you remember, you come back home from school and there'll be a row of spuds there waiting for you to pick up after someone, either your father or some helper left them all ready for you to do. A very unwelcome sight. This is Dad with one of the short-term cows at home. This was pre-electricity, needless to say. We got electricity came to our house and I'm sure a lot of other houses in the early 1960s. I think ours was 1961. And the first thing that was purchased, one of the first things, was a milking machine. Alpha Laval. Boy, it was, we were all glad to see the Alpha Laval. But that was the milking of the cows. And of course going to the creamery was an important one. That's a much younger version of myself. My grandfather's knee. He's already he's home from the creamery. Well, he's actually home from the creamery rather than going to the creamery. I want to be honest about that. The ass and cart all ready. The skim milk returned from the creamery. The creameries, it's kind of interesting in Geevagh. There were two creameries. There was a Geevagh creamery and a Kilmacranny or Kilmac. And they didn't join or they weren't together until NCF got them together. When Geevagh opened, it formed in the late 1890s, 1899, it was linked with Suey, the Suey creamery, but it didn't last. And then what happened was that the Geevagh moved their cream to Riverstown. Geevagh, the only thing Geevagh did was separate. He took the cream from the milk, the separator, and then sent the cream on down to Riverstown. He made the butter. The routine was that the milk went in, it was you weighed it in a big tank, it went in to be separated, and by the time you had moved around the old creamery, unfortunately isn't there, you got your skim milk equivalent in volume to what you brought, and that was brought home to feed to the calves or the pigs, depending on what you had. The first creamery manager in Geevagh was Thomas Phelan, who came all the way from Kilkenny. And he was, in the 1901 census, he was just 20 years old. So he was a very young manager. And he must have been one of the oldest creamery managers when he finished up, probably in his 80s in Geevagh. So he was an institution in his day in the Geevagh creamery setup. The Kilmacranny creamery did produce his own butter. It churned his own butter. One of the things that Kilmac, I'm not so much sure about Geevagh, but Kilmac would have got electricity much earlier than a lot of Kilmac creamery, that is, would have got the electricity naturally. Most of the machinery was run by coal. It was the coal produced steam, and the steam caused the machinery to work, the cream separator. So Pat McPat and Paddy Hart, yeah, would have been the operators in Geevagh Creamery. And who would be without a fair day in Ballyfarnan? There's a bit of commotion here in this particular photograph. Cars and cars. Right up to the early 70s, but basically when Drumshanbo and Ballymore Mart were opened, Ballyfarnan Fair was a big event, particularly in the autumn time when you had store cattle to be sold. It was very, I would have, as a young kid, I wasn't that young, I was maybe 12 or 13, brought the cattle into the fair. I'd have been got ready, I'd been sent off with the cattle. The cattle at that stage were a lot quieter. They were bucket fed, they were a lot easier to handle. So you'd be sent off with them into the town, into Ballyfarnan. When Dad left the cows, he followed on. You had to be careful of some of the tanglers, as you might call them, on your way into town trying to buy cattle of young people, So you had to keep an eye on them to say, no, Daddy's gone. And you move in. But the one thing that you have to do is stand in Ballyfarnan minding those cattle, as you can remember. And even worse still, once the cattle was sold, you'd have to wait and mind them still, because Lux penny would have to be, some of it would have to be spent in many pubs, the Connors, the Shivnings, the Glorans, the O'Rourke's, the Donna's Conlons as well, the Jimmy Conlon man as well. So there was plenty of pubs. It was a great event for them. It might have been a bit of a mess, but it brought business to Ballyfarnan. And of course Ballyfarnan itself was a very important shopping for Geevagh. And vice versa. Ballyfarnan were quite happy to see Geevagh shopping. Okay, so we also had fair days in Boyle. The only reason I put this in, there's two reasons, well maybe three reasons. One is the pigs in the car, and they're fine fat bonnets. They're probably more than bonnets. They're good and healthy. And they were bought and sold in the fairs. The next thing is the attire. They were well dressed, plenty of caps, plenty of hats was the style at the time. And in the background you can see that the fair day wasn't just a buying and selling, it was also a fun day. So you can see a kind of a fun park in the back with merry-go-round and of the swings and so on. So it was a very active day. It was a really busy day in whatever town you were in. Whether it was Boyle, Riverstown, Collooney, wherever. It was a busy day. Okay, so we come on to something that's kind of a bit broad, kind of intangible. But we did have our customs. The horseshoe, of course. The important thing is to keep the horseshoe in that up, to keep all the good luck within that framework. So what customs would we have had locally? We had the St. James's Well was a noted kind of holy well. There were other holy wells as well. But St. James's Well was pilgrimages there, there was patterns there, there was even fairs there, and probably fun as well. Station masses, not just Geevagh obviously, station mass was a custom that's gone back a long way. Candles in the window at Christmas Eve and Christmas Eve, and I do remember this myself, and it wasn't just our house, you could see the mountainside, you could see loads of candles on Christmas Eve. Didn't leave them up for very long obviously. The Wren boys on Stephen's Day, both the local fairs and the ones that would have gone to the pubs. It was good fun. And in my case, I remember joining up with James Smith and doing the rounds through over towards Wards and on through Shanhu and over to Clooney and round and up to Cabra, across the flag field, and then across the hill into Coolmorda and back to Ballycullen. James was very good on the tin whistle. He was a very good musician. And the two of us would sing and Tell Me Man, a few other songs. But we made money. We made enough money to make it worthwhile. There were bonfires on Midsummer's Night on the 23rd of June, but that kind of, I hardly remember that, but some people may remember it down at the crossroads. Prohogue. Anyone heard of Prohogue? Yeah, okay, so you've heard of Prohogue. It was a case where you had this was Easter Sunday, you had a fire. It linked even with eggs, Easter eggs. It wasn't as fancy as the kind of chocolate eggs that we get nowadays. It was very innocent. It was a case of making a fire, boiling up eggs, having a feast of eggs at that stage, which is pretty harmless. Now the final thing, I don't think there are plenty others that I'm sure other people would remember. The Halloween games that we had, just the fun and games. The snap apple. We had obviously barn racks, which you look for usually looking for the ring. You keep eating it until you find the ring. Why the heck a bunch of boys in our house would be looking for the ring? Okay, so we have the superstitions, and this one is definitely a strong superstition in some houses. This is obviously my mother's or a girl's rhyme. 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for a wedding, 4 for a bride, 5 for silver, 6 for gold, and 7 for a story never can be told. So those damn magpies. Now, the fairies and that kind of story. We're actually in a townland called Balmasheen, which is the home or the townland of fairies. So be careful. The other thing that we thought there were fairies, or at least the story was there was fairies in different places, fairy forts. And these were generally kind of placed on this is in my imagination, there were probably older places with bushes or anything that kind of had that kind of spooky kind of feel to it, particularly in the evening time or whatever. Scared of your wits. I remember there was one place up beside Brian's house, it was in Paddy Joe McDonough's field. There was a bunch of bushes there. I regularly went up to Cabra, my cousin's McDonough's. And any time in the just evening time or dusk or whatever, I would race past that particular I don't know where I got that impression. And another nice little kind of one is about May Day flowers, that you put out flowers on May Day, and it's to welcome the good spirits for the summer and protect against evil spirits. There are others. There were plenty of cures as well. Some of them obviously effective, some of them important. Belief is an important thing in curing and in feeling better. There's a St. Dominic's healing stone in Balmadoon, obviously St. James as well, St. Ailbe as well, up on the mountain here. Some of them are more kind of standard ones, like dock leaves for nettles or for other stings. There were cures for burns and ringworm and so on. I remember Bridget Ann Conlon here in the pub. She had the cure for the burn. The reason I know that is because I got a whacker of burn on my arm when I was a kid. I thought it was one of the treatments. It didn't do me any harm. I'd say it probably had. Another aspect, and she was, and I don't know why. Some person might be able to tell me why she had that cure. The people had, because of one of them was a seventh son, and the seventh son was a certain kind of category that was able to do cures. So you had those kind of cures. And there were cures obviously for animal ailments, some of them very practical, and some of them just work, so long as they weren't overdone. Bones, wooden splints covered with tar, that works. In the case of pneumonia, probably mustard over the ribs may not do a lot, but may help. Red water, and red water definitely, in the case of red water, initially you get scour and eventually you get bound, you get the animal or whatever it is, a carbonate pepper, it gets constipated. So at that stage, dosing with some of these will certainly help. In the case of catheter bloat, again, turpentine or something that breaks down the gases is a help. It works. And obviously, if someone is brave enough and probably desperate enough, you just puncture the rumen or the stomach, whatever it is. So you had to do it, and it was done. And there were people around the parish who were, shall we say, they were called quacks, but they were doctors in their own right, and had some of their own cures. So good for them. Right, we're just moving on to the sports and the pastimes that we've had. Geevagh, as we can see, has been like anyone. It's not all work and no pay. The Gaelic Football Club has been here since 1886. And this is a team that was reported in the Sligo champion. And they did win, beat Carrigan Row here in Geevagh. Some of the names are kind of interesting in the sense that there's Cawley, there's O'Rourke's, McPattons, there's two McPattons there, Travers, Tibnan, Stalin, Hart, and Three McTiernan, who could actually be my grandfather, Pete McTiernan, not too sure. It would be around his age. There's some Conlons as well. There's a Murphy. No Murphy's here now at this stage. So Geevagh football has been, on the go for quite a while. And Geevagh itself won the junior football championship in Sligo in 1936. It was a very tight match, 2-5, 2-4. Sorry about that, Mike. Teeling, which were a Colony team. Peter Conlon, I know from the Sligo Champion Corps. Peter was the captain. And there were quite a few people that we recognise. I'd like to have more of them, and that's probably something that somebody can follow up. Paddy McDonough, probably Nick. Tommy McTiernan, my uncle Tommy. Dermot Cawley, the Crossroads, or the D. Probably John McGarty from Coombe as well. And Geevagh actually were in the 1940 junior final as well, but they lost out to Screen in that particular game. So Geevagh have, now they went through the doldrums for, as all of you know, for there's been more depressions, or not depressions, the 1950s and so on. It was only into the 1960s that we started the underage and revival, as it were. We had some very good success right through the 70s and the 80s. Now, Geevagh is well noted for its music and for its cultural aspects, musicians, singers, dancers, for that matter. Joseph McDermott, very well known and legendary flute player, composer. Carmel Gunning, Carmel Nangle as was, from Carndarney. She's still producing and singing and playing lovely music. Historically, obviously, dances were in the houses. Many of the wedding receptions and all of that were carried out in houses, in local houses. There was a bit of dancing at the Crossroads. I don't remember it so much, but there was a Crossroads dancing in Sligo Champion for 1960. No, they did. They were very disappointed that Prince Rainier and Princess Grace didn't arrive. It went off well, even though it looks like it was raining. And the sports day, I remember, many of you remember the sports day here in Geevagh, in the sports league here. The fun and the crack, the donkey derby, the egg and spoon race, and Dermot, Cawley and Mrs. Cawley with their stall and all their chocolates and biscuits and minerals and so on. Lock bow races were, this obviously, these horses are just, they are at Lock bow, watering at Lock bow. So this was another aspect, just a fun aspect, set up. Historically, the Lock bow races have been there for quite some time. I remember as a kid going there a few times. Again, it was just fun. It was a day out. It was pretty harmless. It was boat rides on the lake. My God, the thrill of it. But now I'm going to finish off by taking a little tour around Geevagh. You could call it Geevagh village, but it's more of a Geevagh area. Geevagh as a village is very dispersed. It still is, but at that stage, this is the first ordnance survey map of that was done on Sligo. And you can see that there's very little in the village. You can see Ballinashee Lodge, which was the whole place of a landlord called Keogh, who owned most of the side of the mountain on down towards Anwar's Cross. And then the schoolhouse, which is actually where Father Lawrence lives now. It's not the same house, obviously, but that's the location. The new school was built where St. Ailbig's is now. The Roman Catholic Church or Chapel, as it's called, it was only recently built. It was built in 1828. Then you come down to the crossroads. You had two businesses there. One was Conlon, who had a merchant as well. He was a victim of Conlon. And on the other side of the street was a Thomas McTiernan with a forge. And he was related to our McTiernans as well. So there was a connection there. And actually Dermot Cawley's grandmother was McTiernan. So we have this is the old parish, or the old Geevagh location. And just to point out, the roads that were there, the old road that went down past the lodge, that was the old road which went up on the up the mountain, up towards Cavan and over towards Carramore and St. James as well. It was up on the high, which was normal for most road building back centuries ago. The new road was built in the early 1800s through Geevagh. This was a new road that came from Connor's Cross right through Geevagh onto Viehawks and so on. It was built on very soft ground, which probably the heavy lorries now probably don't appreciate. So let's start at the crossroads. Again, Dermot Cawley's is there. The Conlons that there's a whole story. There's still Conlons, Michael Peters Conlons, Tommy John Conlons, mainly a pub. And then the house over in the distance is Eddie Joe Phelan's, which was his post office, and there are petrol pumps. And between Cawley's and Eddie Joe's is what was the barracks. Initially it would have been the RIC barracks, and then it became the Garda barracks. The last sergeant in control of the barracks would have been Sergeant Martin Loftus in the mid-1950s. He moved into Ballyfarland. So the Geevagh area was covered with the Ballyfarland barracks. Now, the hall in the early 1950s, and there's a photograph with Father Owens at the time, and John Thomas Conlon. I'm not quite sure what it was about. In the back row you can see Tom Bushell. I'm not sure who that man is. Does anyone know who that man is? The back row, the next man. And then Jimmy Flynn, John O'Rourke, Michael Peter Conlon is at the end, John Kelly is in the back row. In the front row then my dad is on the left. T. Donaher is here. Maureen Conlon will be John Thomas's. And I don't know who the other lady is beside John Thomas. The hall was a very important part of, and it's an important part of any village or any community in terms of what happens there. It was a place where dances were held, where bazaars were held, days were held, where you had music. I remember Carmel O'Rourke coming out from Ballyfarn and trying to put some sense into their step dancing, muddy feet. So we had, that was the Geevagh Hall. It's also important to remember there were other halls in the parish, one of them being Jackie's in Connor's Cross, which is a very important part of the kind of community and fun of the times through the 40s, 50s and probably 60s as well. But the Geevagh Hall is an important part. And just on that note, this lovely patchwork quilt has been produced by the group, the community shed and garden group. And they've also done other things. I think it's there's a meet and make group, which this is probably the ladies' side of things. And I think they're doing today they're doing a raffle to try and improve the facilities in the hall and in the garden beside it. So you have the men's shed and meet and make, but it's all the community shed and garden group. But it is quite lovely, which is part of it's part of the ongoing heritage. It's creating heritage. Now we just walk up and we see St. Joseph's Church, where many of us were baptised certainly, and here and others. Many would have gone to Mass, many would have met outside for chats, many funerals, God knows, as well. It is a very, very important part of the community, including all the different priests that came to Geevagh in the day. When I was growing up, he seemed to be there forever, was Father Mee. He was an old man. He was always an old man to me, but he was a decent man. He probably was young once. So you had it, and then there were many, many others. And now we have our own Father Lawrence here who's come to extend the run of priests, parish priests as well. We had our own Geevagh dispensary, which is now a lovely playgroup, and it was fought for and got as well. We had a lovely priest, or lovely Dr. Clancy, who tended to our ailments and woes for quite some number of years. And he was a 24/7 kind of man as well. The only holiday he took was August, I think, he was going to Grange or whatever he had at his house. You can see the O'Donoghue's at the back, growing in the chair. And this is office, main office. Eddie Joe Phelan, Brian Conlon and his wife, Mama Vallis, and Lily McKeown. Tricia Phelan is in the front, Father Quinn, Dr. Clancy and his wife. And Matthew McKeown, who's quite often the heart and soul of many things in Geevagh, the hall, and elsewhere as well. We're nearly there. Geevagh National School, this, as I was saying, the old school was up where the priest's house is now, and it was knocked down, and the new school, this is a new school, as in, it's not the newest school, obviously. It was opened in 1942. It's a school I went to. Quite a big school, but it was cold. So I'm glad to see that the heater installed since I left. It's all gone. There's a lovely new school now, St. Avery's, which is actually the only national school in the parish. When I was going to school, there were schools in all over the parish. St. James as well, which was opened before 1870. Mount Town had its big numbers. Then Killarney, out across the mountain, which again had its own school. Mary Ellen Macklemore would have been there on a single teacher school, but she was the one in charge. So you have Kilmac, Kilmatrani, St. Joseph's, which is probably the last one to close. It's amalgamated with Geevagh. Then there was Kilmac Church of Ireland, which was an early one, and then Cluna, which is out near to Ballindoon. So at this stage we just have one school, but it's a lovely school. And finally we're right back at the sports field. We're right here where we're sitting, and it's lovely to see such a fine facility here that's used by all the community. It's a community resource. It was a basic flattish field when we started playing on it, with a lot of rushes and a lot of roughness up at the far end. But we had it. It was a useful sort of thing, quite well developed. I started off with the idea that the heritage is a legacy of the past. And even the recent past becomes heritage very quickly. But the past, as in the stuff that we talk about, the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th century, it's all a legacy of the past. The physical things, some of them, they will continue. They will certainly continue the landscape. It's not going to change very easily. And some of the buildings will disappear. I would hope, I've mentioned this as well, that some of the older buildings, and so they have some of the older buildings like Ballindoon Abbey, Shannon Church and so on. They've lasted this long, and that's quite an achievement. Some of our traditions and customs and beliefs maybe change. We're quite a different take on things. There's a lot more kind of influences in the way we think in terms of, to say the very least, TV, internet, and all of that has taken its toll in terms of whether that's good or bad is for another day. So we like to pass it on to our own folk, and passing it on in terms of recording aspects of our own history. And we're very fortunate to have a very active club here in Geevagh, and Geevagh GAA Club. So hopefully at some stage we will get a history of it, including all the achievements of both the guys and the ladies, which has been fantastic in the last 20, 30 years. One of the things that I found difficult actually in preparing this talk is to find photographs or find things that are local. So if that can be done, it's not that easy to collect and put together a book with photographs of older, old photographs of people and events. That would be nice. Finally, as I said before, we should try and protect some of the things that are probably vulnerable because we don't probably recognise them. We do recognise Ballindoon Abbey, obviously, and Shandon Church as important. Maybe some of the other things in the countryside, like the lime kilns. I know them, thankfully, the megalithic tombs that we have are safe, and hopefully will be safe. But you never know. They can be. It's much easier to disturb them nowadays. And the Geevagh barracks as well here in the village. Okay, so
I want to thank you all for, number one, for all of you for coming. And that's a great turnout altogether. I appreciate that. It's obvious that there's a great interest and a love and that for our own parish. Whether we live here permanently, or have lived here, or whether we're going back. I know that there are some people here whose mothers and fathers that were born and reared here in Geevagh, made a living here in Geevagh. Some of them went further afield, some of them went very far afield. And they're also interested, so they'll be pleased to hear about Geevagh and indeed the turnout today. So again, I say thank you to all of you, and I appreciate you being here. Good night.
I just assume the responsibility of just bringing it to a close, just saying that Aidan, that was just terrific. It was powerful, it was awesome, and I think it will provide us with much to think about and reflect and to chat about over a possible cup of tea. There's going to be a cup of tea, and if you can wait and have a cup of tea, we'll be able to chat with one another. Aidan, thank you.